We are here. You guys aren't probably seeing my face, but that's okay. Paul Cada again here with you. It is my pleasure to introduce Miss Jenny Novak. Jenny was just recently selected as the first system-wide director of emergency management and continuity for the California State University system. She has had a distinguished career in emergency management, supporting some of the state's largest natural disasters, including the Thomas and Woolsey fires. Jenny brings a unique level of creativity and energy to all that she does. She was recognized by the White House in 2016 for her innovative approach in preparedness training in higher education for her development of innovative preparedness exercises such as the zombie apocalypse. I first met Jenny when we were both attending the Wildland Urban Interface class at the National Fire Academy. Jenny immediately stood out as a quick-thinking, witty, and innovative individual. Since that time, I've had the opportunity to watch her take on ever greater challenges. Each time, she seems to come out on top with greater outcomes. So I'm very excited that Jenny could join us this morning to share some of her insight and creativity around wildfire preparedness and recovery. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Jenny. And we'll get going with our keynote this morning.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today in the virtual environment, even though it would have been so nice to be with you actually in Colorado for this conference. I was really looking forward to it. But I think that we're going to have a really great session today. Despite that, I'm going to try to do my best to make this session somewhat interactive, since that is the theme of my session. So we have a recording that we'll go into that I did earlier this week, but I am going to do some interactive bits as well. So in the beginning, I just kind of want to say that when I saw the theme of this conference and I really thought about what's your role, I think everybody has a really unique role to play. But at the same time, I think that all of us just being here today and taking the initiative to grow and learn in the way of our careers and collaborate makes us all inherently connectors. And I think that that's really something that we should focus on today and this week in terms of connecting with one another, understanding the context of where other people are coming from, and really kind of discovering what brings us here and what's important to us and ways that other people might be different, and try to kind of bridge those connections so that you can collaborate together and bring unique and diverse perspectives together in the future. So that's really kind of what inspires me when I think about this. So just a little bit about me and my background and some of the things that influence me. I'm an emergency manager. I think that a few of you are, but most of you are not emergency managers. So that's a little bit unique about me. I'm also in California, and I know most of you are not in California. My background right now is in higher education, but I've spent a lot of time in state and local government as well. I'm a new mom. I just had a baby last summer, so she just turned 14 months old. And I grew up in a rural area, but now I live in the Los Angeles area, so I'm very much in an urban area now. I am also of the millennial generation and a first generation college graduate. So these are all kind of things about me that influence my work and how I approach the problem that we share, which is the ever increasing disasters of wildfires. So I did a little bit of background here on you guys, and I want to create this visual so that you could kind of get an idea. This is a word cloud that shows the words that were most popular in either your job titles or your organization. So I looked at those two columns in a list that Wendy gave me. So just take a minute and think about the things that we have in common and the things that might be unique that you bring to this conference today. So obviously wildfire is something that kind of unites all of us. I think partners is the one that's sort of behind my head there. But I wanted to create this as sort of a different way to look at us and our backgrounds, especially in this space where we don't necessarily get to mix the way that we might in a physical environment. And then I also wanted to do a couple of live polls just so we can also get an idea of other backgrounds that people are bringing to the table. So I'm going to start a live poll, and hopefully you can all see that in the our on-air platform over here. So go ahead and select a response. I'll give you guys just a few minutes. And then we'll see. Now I think I can share it. We've got 28 votes. So you should be able to see now, it looks like 53% of us are from the millennial generation. And then there's also 21% boomers and 26% Generation X. And it's changing a little bit as I say that because it's a live poll. But now we can kind of get an idea of where we're at in the middle here. So we don't have anyone post 95 or before 45. I wasn't sure, so I added those in there. But you can kind of get an idea of where we're coming from in that regard. So let's do another one and take a look at our living situation. Which term best describes the area where you live? So now you can kind of see most of you are showing either rural or suburban, although that's changing a little bit as more votes come in. But urban seems to be the minority there. So it's kind of cool. This is sort of a fun way to look at how the crowd is made up. And there's all kinds of different things that we could do this on. I had a lot more ideas, but I don't want to take away from the time that is left in the session so that we can play my keynote and then also do a little bit of live polling and interaction at the end. So I want to turn it back over to Paul now so that we can get right started with the keynote. And then if you have questions as it goes through, we can, I can look in the Q&A and then I'll also get into more details verbally after the talk. So thank you. Hi, I'm Jenny Novak, and today I'm going to be talking about two of my emergency management passions. One, developing interactive preparedness outreach events, and two, facilitating effective community recovery into one presentation where I'm going to focus on the underlying theme, which is utilizing interactive and engaging approaches. So before I get into it, I want to talk a little bit about the context of where I'm coming from as a California emergency manager in 2020. So this slide depicts the state of California and areas that have burned between 1910 and 2019. That means it's already a little bit outdated, and I'll go into that in a minute. But you can see some of the statistics on the side here that show that almost 7 million acres have burned just since October 2017. And that's pretty much a very similar number to what burned for the previous 10-year period before that. So that's 3 years versus 10 years. The last 3 years have been just as bad as that previous 10 years. And then just this year in 2020, we already have burned over 3 million acres, and new fires just started this weekend. So I think that number is already probably getting closer to 4 million. And that's just in the past 3 months between July and September. Our wildfire season is just getting started here. So this is definitely a hot topic. This map shows now an addition of some of the larger fires that have happened in 2020. So you can see these fires here, and these are already 5 of the 6 largest fires in California history that have occurred just this year between July and September. It's kind of mind-blowing that we are on this trajectory where it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Every year we say unprecedented, and then the next year just blows that year away. So the time between when the Cedar Fire was the largest in California history and when the Thomas Fire overtook it as #1, 14 years. And since the Thomas Fire overtook, it was a matter of months, not even 1 year. And now that has happened again already this year with the August fire. We also, as emergency managers, have just been responding around the clock. We've been activated for 212 days already this year at the State Operations Center with no end in sight. That's over 75% of the year so far we have spent in a very active state of response, both due to COVID and wildfires and public safety power shutoffs and grid emergency incidents. So really 2020 has just been the year of disaster for us. And really, that is taking us into a new paradigm that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But I already mentioned the Thomas Fire, which was at one point California's largest wildfire. And I want to talk just a little bit so you get an idea more of where I'm coming from personally about my experience with the Thomas Fire, because it was the
first fire that I really responded to when I was at Cal OES, and it was a major incident. And it occurred in December, which, traditionally isn't thought of as maybe wildfire part of the year. Here in California, that's usually the fall for us. But this happened in a month where a lot of people would think that was the winter. So I first heard about the Thomas Fire on Twitter, actually, and I got the call from my manager a couple hours later, and it was late in the evening, probably about 10 o'clock at night, saying that I needed to go, and I needed to go now to help support the Ventura EOC. So I made a 90-mile trek from my house in Long Beach up to Ventura. You can get an idea here of where that fire was if you're not as familiar with Southern California geography. Los Angeles kind of behind my head right here. And you can see where Santa Barbara was. So I made this drive all the way up the 405 to that 101 freeway there. And it was late at night. And already, earlier that day, I had noticed this phenomenon that kind of happens to me, which is that when there's fire weather, my hands start to get dry and cracked, and my knuckles even start to bleed a little bit. And I had noticed earlier that day that my hands were starting to sense that fire weather in the air. And as I got in my car, it really became evident to me just how windy it was. This fire occurred during one of our signature Santa Ana wind events, which I understand are like the Chinook wind events in Colorado, where it's these dry winds, super low humidity, just that bone dryness in the air. And as I was driving up the freeway that night, those winds were really pushing on my car, and I had to work to study my lane positioning on that drive. And I'll never forget this drive, because as I got to the top of the Conejo Grade, there's this precipice there that you usually have this beautiful vantage point with the Pacific Ocean and the hills in the background. But that night, all I saw was darkness, with the exception of this jack-o'-lantern smile on the hillside of these orange flames that were they looked so sinister, especially with everything below it just being completely dark. And I knew with 500,000 people living in that area that there should have been lights. I should have encountered that signature comfort of seeing lights there, but it was pitch black. And I'll always remember that, because nobody was even talking about the power outage. There was a power outage that was impacting, probably 500,000 people, but everybody was so focused on talking about this fire that was moving so fast that it had started near Santa Paula and was just barreling toward the Pacific Ocean. And so there I was, sort of at that precipice, seeing this crown of flames on the horizon. And then I made my descent down into the valley, and I felt like I was sinking into this dark and foreboding night of uncertainty as I drove along the freeway. And I knew there should be these big buildings on either side of me, but I could barely make out their dark outlines. And as I exited onto the streets, I realized that traffic signals were out, and I kept coming across these tree branches and other debris that were just blowing in the wind, and they were just suddenly materializing in front of me. And I remember my sweaty fingered grip on that steering wheel and looking around at the houses in the neighborhoods where there should have been Christmas lights glowing, and I could see the dark outlines of the reindeer and the snowmen on the front lawns, but they looked a lot more like Halloween decorations than the cheery Christmas decorations that they were supposed to be. So it was a very eerie setup as I drove to my first major disaster. And when I got to the parking lot of the government center, this is what I saw. I was struck by the bright contrast of the flames that were very, very close to where we were there in the parking lot. And I just couldn't believe that little fire I'd heard about on Twitter near Santa Paula, just a couple hours later, had made it to the back door of the city of Ventura, 15 miles from its point of origin. So as I got out of my car, I remember I could feel that heat from the fire, and I could smell that thick smoke in the air and feel that wind that was fueling the fire. And on that night, 500 structures would be lost. But thankfully, due to the heroic efforts of firefighters and of my fellow emergency managers who issued their first wireless emergency alert, lives would be saved in that incident. So the Thomas Fire really was kind of my first foray into this. And if this story sounds familiar to you, as I understand in Colorado, there have been quite a few wildfires already this year in your state, and you are likely in a heightened state of response. I want to talk a little bit about that sort of new model of response and recovery. So you might be familiar with the old disaster cycle diagram where it's assumed that you go from response to recovery and then you go back into preparedness, and it's this nice little circle that just assumes everything works in a linear format. Well, 2020 has not been the case for that. We have seen just surge after surge of response activity. Emergency managers have been going nonstop all year. If it's COVID, if it's the fires, if it's the civil unrest incidents and storms as well. So when you find yourself here constantly in a cycle of response and recovery, what you also find is that you're not really ever getting to that preparedness part of it. So when I was originally envisioning this talk, I thought, okay, well, I'll talk about preparedness first and then recovery, because that is, the way of things, the linear nature of our lives. But honestly, that's not the way it's going anymore. So I wanted to start by talking about the ongoing response, and I want to talk a little bit about recovery, because recovery does mirror response in that we have to undertake these recovery activities, even if we are still responding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my experiences from the Thomas Fire, and then a year later in Ventura County, when we had the Hill and Woolsey Fire, I was the state division supervisor for both fires. So I really focused on that transition from response to recovery. So I'm going to talk some about what I saw as interactive approaches to recovery that were really best practices that are worth sharing in other communities. So here's a conceptual model that I developed when I started thinking about this and what made these best practices, what made them very effective. There's a few key elements. One, humanize the situation. So never forget that these are people who have lost everything in the wildfire, that these are human, emotional lives that you're interacting with. It can sometimes be easy to just look at statistics, but these are people, and we need to think about people first as we're developing response, recovery, preparedness. You want to appeal to somebody on an emotional level because they'll be much more likely to listen to you. Another is that sharing stories fosters resilience. So giving people who have gone through these life-changing incidents an opportunity to share their stories with one another and to connect about maybe things that they have done differently, different experiences, but with that common thread that they were all around this disaster, that promotes healing and fosters a community resilience where people can kind of share these emotions and get them out there. Another is the place identity itself. So people tend to really strongly connect with their community, and that's why in the event of a lot of these type of disasters, you see campaigns like we had Ventura Strong, or there was also a mass shooting there in Ventura in the city of Thousand Oaks right before the second wildfire started. That same day, actually, there was a mass shooting at a bar and grill. And so we started using the hashtag Thousand Oaks Strong. And you'll see this, New Orleans Strong. Lots of different communities that have been impacted by disasters really tend to rally around that place that brings them together. And thinking about that physical location and how that can be recognized and weaved into your recovery processes is really important. And finally, as much as possible, if you can be that connector and that mechanism that helps to match a need with a surplus, that's really going to help promote an interactive recovery. So often people want to help. They either have time, they have money, or they have stuff that they can contribute. And there are others that are in need, but sometimes what's missing is how to match those two things, that existing need with that surplus is a really important part. So keep all of these things in mind as you think about recovery, as I know that many of you probably will, since you have been in heightened state of response this year. And one way to make that happen is the establishment of long-term recovery groups. So in both of these instances, we were a presidentially declared major disaster. So we had FEMA's voluntary agency liaisons come out to help us establish a long-term recovery group. So this is mostly non-governmental organizations. So you've got your typical players, the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, some of faith-based organizations such as the Southern Baptist that have very active disaster assistance programs, local resources like a 211, other national organizations like Meals on Wheels, Habitat for Humanity, and then you likely will have grassroots NGOs that might pop up just for the disaster. We had a couple, Thomas Fire Help, 805, Local Love Project. these things that they came up because they saw the need and they wanted to help. So a long-term recovery group develops a coordination mechanism for all those groups to come together, and that way they can work on shared case management. They can share what they're doing to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts and that all the different activities are coordinated. So that's what we did with this group. Things like navigating your insurance workshops, like this flyer shown here. There were just so many things that this group did. So I definitely recommend this structure and model. So here are some of the community healing events that I saw in Ventura that were really good and interactive. So one, capitalizing on the time of year. So we had structures lost around the holidays, around Christmas time, and the long-term recovery group organizations brought together survivors into what they called a holiday bazaar, where they could do shopping, but with donated goods from local businesses. So they would go in and they would get to shop, but they would get to do it for free. So it was this great way to kind of promote healing in the holiday sort of environment and focus on the local place identity, small businesses. And what you see in the middle is a photo of the memorial that was created for the victims of that mass shooting that I mentioned. So this is a symbolic place that allows people to physically gather and come together and honor those lives lost. There were 12 water jets here to represent the 12 victims that lost their lives. There are also pavers, 248 pavers to represent the survivors, as many people were fortunate enough to escape with their lives that night. And then you also see here on the far right a picture of a book called From the Fire, which was a way to have community members share their stories. So this book was published by someone in the local community, and it's just a collection of stories of how people evacuated during those first few scary nights and where they ended up and how they got back and where they were in the rebuilding process. And this was a great way for people to share their stories and then to read stories of others and feel inspired by that community hope and healing. And additionally, not pictured here, but for matching a need with a surplus, there was a great example. We had a secondary hazard, a major debris flow that happened in Montecito, which is the county just north of Ventura. But that really impacted Ventura because so many people drove across Highway 101 to get there for their jobs or for doctor's appointments. The detour was 5 hours to get around that when that mudslide occurred because of just the topography there next to the Pacific Ocean. It's just not easy to get around on the ground in a vehicle. So we had local private pilots that actually volunteered their time and their equipment to be able to transport people that needed to get across, people with critical medical appointments who might have actually died if they hadn't had some assistance. And then the doctors and nurses providing those services, first responders and other critical members of the community that needed to get across. So that was an amazing example of matching a need with a surplus. Additionally, we saw this camp being organized for survivors, children survivors of the fire. So this gave kids an opportunity. It was a day camp to get together with others that had gone through this really kind of traumatic experience and to reflect on it. Here you see a wall of memories, and the kids were able to draw some of their experiences with the fires. You see some of the flames, you see shelter depicted, grabbing what they needed before the fire. So children are often kind of an afterthought, but they're a really, really critical part of society. And the same formats that we use for adults don't work for children. So you need to think in a targeted way when you want to work with different segments of your society. And then also another segment that you might not think about enough is yourselves as responders to this, as people that are hearing story after story of loss, and what impact does that have on you as an individual. So this workshop was put together by the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, and they came, and it was a very interactive format for us to really reflect on what we were doing, to think about our personal mission statements, to recognize our own contributions, and spend some time looking sort of inward rather than all the outward focus that had been done on the community. We actually were also writing a letter of gratitude to ourselves that they then mailed to us several weeks later. And that was really an amazing thing to get that in the mail. And it helped to heal as somebody that had been just involved with disaster after disaster in that community. So these are some great examples from recovery, but should we ever be able to get back to a stance of preparedness, what can we do about all of this to really get people thinking about these disasters before they hit home in their own community? What can we do to boost that preparedness? Well, community preparedness fairs is one way that maybe we could do that, right? This is something that's very common. It's something that's seen in the industry all the time. It's kind of a simple way to check a box in your organization. You've organized one of these fairs. You can say that you've touched maybe 500 people with your message. That's great, good statistics and all that. But I just can't, in good faith, advocate for community preparedness fairs. Although I know how much work goes into them, they're a little bit lazy. I don't know how many times I've gone to one of these and just looked around and seen people at their booths scrolling through social media, kind of wondering, is anybody going to come and get one of these flyers, maybe having a conversation with some people, but likely not. There's just not much opportunity for two-way engagement at these things. Even when you do passports, even when you do spin the wheels, it's really a one-way format where you're passing out brochures. People are collecting all those papers into their bags, and who knows if they're ever going to look at them. They probably go in the recycling bin as soon as they get home. And even if they do look at them, you're not there to answer questions anymore. So, I want to tell a story because I don't think that we can keep doing what we've always done and get the message across. And I thought that we were doing a good job. Here in California, our big message with earthquakes is drop, cover, hold on. I feel like it's been plastered all over every billboard. Well, I was recently at a doctor's appointment and my doctor asked how work was going. I mentioned an earthquake preparedness event I had just done. And then my doctor, who I entrust with critical medical decisions, he's an active member of his community, a renowned research scientist, says to me, well, you're supposed to get in the doorway, right? So if he's not even hearing the message, somebody that's actively out there in the community, then it's a pretty good sign that a lot of people are not getting the message. So we need to stop doing what we've always done, which is these preparedness fairs, and to start engaging with people in a way that's going to spark action. We need to get creative in order to really move that needle on preparedness. So here's some focus on interactive methods and what this really means. And some of this can be applied to the recovery I already just talked about. It needs to be a two-way street where the educator and the student have an opportunity to have dialogue back and forth. You need an opportunity to engage with the material. As many of your senses as you can use as possible is great. So tactile things, exhibits that they can kind of play with and interact with. Quizzes are another really great thing because when people get a question wrong, they're often going to be much more curious and pay a lot more attention to what the correct answer is, rather than if they just read it on a brochure and they're like, oh, well, I already knew that. Even if they didn't, they're probably going to internalize it a lot more when they find out that they actually didn't know it because they got an answer wrong on a quiz. So that's a good opportunity. You want to challenge people in real time, and you can have an opportunity to develop critical thinking through these approaches, where it's not just what goes in a preparedness kit or where the evacuation zones are, but why. Explain that to people, and then it's not so much a matter of memorizing the information, but taking those concepts and developing that critical thinking that allows them to then apply similar concepts outside of that specific situation. So if they understand, high density, lack of egress, topography that drives wildfire evacuation zones, they might be able to recognize that even in areas they're not familiar with. Also, interactive methods give them an opportunity to engage with trusted leaders. So when we're issuing an emergency alert, already they're going to know who it's coming from and say, oh yeah, okay, and maybe be a lot more likely to listen rather than spend time delaying and milling and wondering, do I really trust this alert? Is this fake news? And it also gives them an opportunity, as much as possible, if you can do it in groups, to engage with their peers, because research has shown that when people see other members of their peer group taking action, it's much more likely to validate that for them as something that they should do and they should participate in. And it also, as much as you can, to tailor that campaign to the specific element of the community you're looking at and create a personal sense of relevance is really important, because one size just does not fit all, and you need to make it as honed to that segment of the population as possible. And maybe working with community champions in that group to do so is really a good method. So with this in mind, I created what I call my formula for fun emergency preparedness messages, because some people think this stuff is dry and boring, but it doesn't have to be. So one of the ingredients in my formula is the interactive method. We already talked about that a little bit, but some examples might be scavenger hunt, board games, escape rooms. You see all these things here. Also pairing that with what is our fun element, the pop culture theme. So that can be really anything that might be a good idea for a party. So zombies, Hawaiian luau, different decade themes. There's lots of great room for creativity here. And then that third piece is pairing it with a specific preparedness message. Well, it might be tempting to try to give them the entire toolbox and say, here you go, this is all of our messaging. It's overwhelming, and you're really going to have more success if you hone in on that specific message and really make your preparedness outreach campaign on one of those pieces. And you can always develop more later that focus on some of your other messaging. So now I'm going to give you some examples of how this worked when I was the emergency preparedness manager at Cal State Northridge, and I was working specifically with students on this. So that is the kind of key element of society that I focused on here. So the first thing that we did was a zombie preparedness scavenger hunt. So we always did this around Halloween, kind of this time of year. We'd use spooky teasers like this poster you see here. We had zombie makeup for the participants and the volunteers that were helping. We really tried to create an immersive environment as much as we could. And what this event did is it basically challenged students to prepare for the zombie apocalypse by creating these starter disaster preparedness kits. Because if you're prepared for the zombie apocalypse, you're prepared for pretty much anything, earthquakes, wildfires, storms, you name it. So we partnered with a lot of different departments on campus to offer branded items that could go into a preparedness kit. So the Student Health Center offered Band-Aids, the Career Center offered hand sanitizers, athletics offered rain ponchos, all different kinds of things like this. And it alleviated some of that burden on the emergency management budget because others were contributing. So we were able to create much more robust kits. So if students went around to all these locations and they built their kit and they got stamps on their little card and then brought it back to our main checkpoint, then they'd be entered into a contest, a drawing to win a grand prize, which was all fun, like Halloween themed things that you see here. So here's some more photos from the event, a picture of some of the branded items that went into the kit, the zombie makeup. We had a Snapchat filter the second year that was very popular. And we had a lot of success with this incident or event. We were able to show that over half of the participants visited a brand new location on campus today, which wasn't just speaking to the preparedness of creating the kit itself, but preparedness in the sense that now the students were more exposed to what that campus community had to offer and more connected and dialed in with campus resources like the Health Center, like the Career Center. And overall, that has been shown to boost community resilience. So this was sort of an underlying theme of the incident. And we also showed that almost 80% never had a disaster preparedness kit before participating. So this was really an underserved part of the community. There was a great need that we were filling with this program. So because of the statistics and the fun nature of the incident, we were actually awarded by FEMA an individual and community preparedness award called Awareness to Action in 2016. And I was able to go to the White House to accept this award, which was really a neat experience. And ever since then, we've been sharing that program with other universities all around the country that have also had a lot of success. I think it would also work in other formats, maybe in like a small business district, downtown areas where you could get those businesses participating anywhere where you've got kind of a geographic area that people can move around. It's a really great concept, and please feel free to steal it. So we also wanted to build on this success by doing something different. So we decided to build an earthquake-themed escape room. And we had a big earthquake in Northridge in 1994. So our fun theme for this was 90s. That was kind of our pop culture theme. So we wanted it to kind of be a throwback to that. So there was that. And then an escape room was our interactive format. And if you're not familiar with that, those are a game, a live action game that's becoming more and more popular. Usually they're about an hour long. You can go with your friends or coworkers. Sometimes corporations send their people there for team building. And you are challenged with a series of puzzles around around a common theme to escape the room or kind of beat that game. And so you have a timer, usually an hour, and if you complete all those actions, then you win. So ours was similar, but it was only 9 minutes because we wanted to maximize the number of kids going through the game. And they were able to solve a series of puzzles that were related specifically to earthquakes. They actually practiced mitigation strategies such as strapping heavy furniture to walls, putting putty on the bottom of small breakables. And then at the end, they were challenged by our moderators would play the earthquake early warning sound, which would then trigger them to take the protective action of drop, cover, hold on. So it was also kind of a drill in that way. And we know that muscle memory is really critical when it comes to building those skills so that people will know immediately what to do during a disaster. So this was really, really fun, and we had a lot of great success with that. We paired it with an educational, very short lecture from our geology professors and our American Red Cross partners that just clarified the message, just in case it had been confusing at all. We wanted to make sure it was clear. We partnered with other partner agencies that came and provided additional resources if people had questions. And we had geology students presenting class projects there near the event. So it was a really successful, fun, interactive event. And we also did a post-event survey on that. Almost everybody would recommend it to a friend, but you always have that one person, right, who's a dissenter. But everybody did say they wanted to see events like this or similar at least annually on campus. And even though most people said they'd never been to any other earthquake workshop before, almost all of them were able to identify the correct action after participating in the game. So it was a really amazing way. But statistics are great, but for me, I'm going to share a story of what was most meaningful takeaway for me. And that was a couple of weeks later, I was in a meeting on campus with some administrators, and one of them took me aside and said, I sent my students to your preparedness activity. And I said, oh yeah, how did they like it? And he said, well, they loved it. And when they got back to the office, the first thing they did was look up on the computer, what are the proper straps they can use to secure the furniture in the office? And then it arrived and they installed it. They never would have thought to do that if they hadn't participated in your activity. So it's stories like that where you can really see the deeper impact that these sort of interactive activities will have on people. If you go to a community preparedness fair, you might not remember it at all 5 years later, but if you participate in an escape room themed around earthquakes, well, you're probably a lot more likely to remember that and some of the lessons learned. So I know that it's also challenging right now because a lot of these types of things I'm talking about really rely on in-person interactions. So just a couple of ideas in this new normal to kind of get the ball rolling until we can do more face-to-face. Online games is a great way because you're taking that same concept of gamifying and challenging people in real time, but doing it in a safe, COVID-safe way. Apps or computer games. There's an example here of the online Beat the Quake game, which is similar to the escape room that I created. You go in and you click on different pieces of furniture, and then you say, what's the best way to secure this? And you're on a timer, you don't know how long it's going to be. And at the end, everything comes crashing down if you didn't secure it. And then you get a score based on that. And you can challenge other people. It's a really great example of that. Using multimedia to share stories is another really good way to apply some of these concepts during the COVID-19 era. I have a friend and colleague, Lauren Schneider, who actually created a COVID-19 Heroes podcast where she featured different people from different segments of society that were sharing their stories and how they were contributing in COVID-19. And then utilizing interactive webinars, video calls. I thought people wouldn't want to participate in these things in front of their computers, but we've actually seen really big increases in people participating. I think it's a little easier now maybe than it was before. So using these technologies to stay in touch with people is really important. And even though I wanted to be there in person today, I still want to try to do some interactive things during this talk. So I'm now going to turn it back over to Paul so that we can get into some
So it's actually me, I think, that you're turning it back over to, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so just in a quick couple of minutes that we have left, I want to challenge the group to come up with an idea on your own for an interactive activity utilizing the formula for fun. So we'll start by having a vote on which interactive method of these sounds most appealing to you. So everyone try to select which one sounds the best to you. Okay, so we've got some votes in. It looks like so far the winner is scavenger hunt. All right, so let's look at fun theme. Which fun theme is most appealing to you? Okay, looks like we're looking at a murder mystery and detective story. And how about preparedness messaging? What is most important, do you think, right now for people that we want to get the message across to? All right, so it looks like home hardening. So what we're looking at is a scavenger hunt that has a murder mystery detective theme around home hardening. So that's a really creative idea that we've all just come up with. And it's something that maybe, as COVID-19 finally leaves us, we can try working on that. And I really challenge people to think about how you might be able to use these ideas. And we even have runner-ups too. You can look in here and see a fun Star Wars escape room that is themed around defensible space. So this is kind of just a way that you can think creatively by pairing these different three ingredients in the formula. And I hope that people are inspired by some of these ideas. And I hope that people take some time to partner, and because you really can't do these without collaboration with each other, especially with people with different backgrounds. So I wanted to leave a couple minutes to see if there were questions. So I think one of them just came in. Let's see.
Yeah, Jamie Gomez from West Region Wildfire Council had a question about what are your general thoughts about incorporating effectiveness monitoring? And two, have you conducted an outreach education campaign or event where the results showed that it was not a very effective method?
I absolutely am a big fan of post-event surveys to see whether or not messages are getting through, to see whether or not people like things. I came from a disaster research background, so having survey results is really, really helpful, especially to show to leadership the effectiveness of it. So I think that, what I would typically do is get people's emails and then send out a survey afterwards, and also offer some kind of a prize for filling out the survey. So I think that is a way that I have typically measured effectiveness. In terms of finding an event where the results showed it was not really as effective, I think that's probably when I was on campus, I would also host these lunchtime workshops, which are kind of a more traditional format for staff. And sometimes I would get results back that, oh, it was too long, or I didn't understand this or that. So I think that, yes, I feel like I've gotten some less than stellar feedback, usually on things that were not as creative or as fun. Did we get any other ones in here? A couple other comments.
Yeah, we got about
30 seconds.
30 seconds, yep.
Okay, well, I guess my background isn't showing right now, but my contact information, you guys can feel free to share that. I have a website, jennynovak.com. There's videos from the escape room and other resources that you can check out there. So thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited that I could be here.
Awesome, Jenny. Thank you for your time and joining us today, and great presentation.
Yeah, thank you.